Welcome to the Fantasy Football Fanalist Podcast, presented by Fantasy Data. Here's your hosts, Billy Muzio and Bradley Stalder.
And welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Football Fanalist. This time we have a matinee episode featuring Minnesota beat reporter Will Ragatz. As you can tell, Billy is not here with us today. He is out golfing, deciding to play some golf before the season gets started. I'm doing well. Will, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing pretty good. Got Vikings' second preseason game tomorrow night, so be interesting to learn some things. I think they're going to actually play their starters in that one after only playing second and third stringers against the Broncos and getting blown out in their first preseason game. So that'll be a little more fun to watch. The last one got kind of ugly.
It did get ugly pretty quickly. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be talking about the Vikings and a little bit about the dynamic in the NFC North. We'll start with Kirk Cousins. So Cousins, he seemed to have a pretty close to career year. Threw 35 touchdowns, had 13 interceptions, over 4,200 passing yards. Do the Vikings perceive this season to be like the bar that he needs to hit, or was that like overperforming from what the previous couple years that he had with the Vikings?
No, I think that's kind of what they expect from him. And ever since they switched offensive schemes in 2019, bringing in the Gary Kubiak, the whole Shanahan-Kubiak offense with the wide zone running game and play action, that's kind of unlocked Cousins, at least from an efficiency perspective. If you look at things like EPA and things of that nature, he's been really effective over the last 2 years. He's really good in the play action game, the bootlegs out to the left. He's a great deep ball thrower. And then obviously they've had the weapons. In 2019, it was Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs. And then last year you replaced Stephon Diggs with Justin Jefferson, who I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit. But I think they're hoping for similar production from Cousins. The thing that they would like to see him kind of get rid of is the inconsistency. The last 2 years he's started really slow. Then he's picked it up and had great games down the stretch. But like last year, there was a game against the Falcons in like week 6 or 7 or whatever it was when he threw 3 picks in the first half, and there were people calling for him to be benched. And the year before, it was a really slow start in September. So they'd like to see him come out of the gate strong, kind of avoid those meltdown games where he seems like he just doesn't really even know what he's doing, and just have a higher baseline, and then also have those big games where he can take advantage of good matchups against weak secondaries.
It didn't seem like his job was in jeopardy until the draft. Kellen Mond was drafted a lot earlier than expected, and it wasn't really on the radar, at least from my perspective and a few other analysts' perspectives. So when he was selected, what was the initial reaction of Mond being selected by the Vikings, and how much of an immediate versus long-term threat does he pose to Cousins as the starter in Minnesota?
Yeah, well, I was surprised because the first 2 years that Cousins was here in Minnesota, they didn't have a backup who was going to challenge him at all. In 2018, it was Trevor Siemian. In 2019, it was Sean Mannion. In 2020, it was Sean Mannion as well. So the first 3 years. And this year, they come out and draft Kellen Mond with the second pick in the 3rd round, top 75 selection. And I was like, okay, they're finally getting somebody who's going to come in and push Kirk. Not right away, to answer the second part of your question. There's almost no risk of Kirk losing his starting job this year, just because Kellen Mond is a raw developmental prospect. He's got a long ways to go in terms of the processing and going through his reads and just understanding the intricacies of the playbook and things like that. Mike Zimmer has talked about how he just needs to speed everything up with his tempo. But this season is going to be an important one because Kirk Cousins now has somebody behind him who can push him in the future. So if Kirk struggles, if he falters, has some rough patches, particularly if he doesn't get the Vikings at least to the playoffs, with his contract situation, there's going to be people who are going to advocate for, okay, maybe you should look to trade Cousins, see if another quarterback needy team will bite. and then either build around, either give Mond a chance if you like what he does throughout the year, if you like the way he develops. He had some ups and downs in the preseason opener against the Broncos. It was only like 6 for 16, but ran for a couple first downs, made a couple nice throws. So you can see kind of the flashes of potential, and all the physical tools are there. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting situation to watch. But the bottom line is Kirk Cousins not going to lose his job this year unless things go dramatically south.
Now, there were concerns about Cousins and the rest of the quarterback room at the beginning of, not the beginning of the offseason, but right before the preseason games and training camp with regard to the COVID list. They were out for a few weeks, and Coach Zimmer was not pleased, obviously, about that. Some of the third and fourth and fifth string quarterbacks getting play. Jake Browning, for instance, getting some play. How concerned are the Vikings about the COVID situation with regard to their quarterback room, in particular Kirk Cousins, making some offhanded comments that were obviously disconcerting?
Yeah, well, they're not going to come out and say it, really. I mean, Mike Zimmer has come out and expressed his frustration for not just Kirk Cousins, but a number of high-profile players on the team. Adam Thielen, Harrison Smith are believed, not confirmed, but believed to be among the unvaccinated players as well. The Vikings had something like the lowest percentage of vaccinated players. And Cousins in particular has made it pretty clear with his public comments that he's not planning on getting vaccinated. So that's just, it's a worry. Like, you can do everything to follow the protocols, like he said, and you can try to be really smart about avoiding close contact and things like that. But at the end of the day, there's certain things that you can't really control. And the protocols are so much harsher on unvaccinated players. Like, you have to miss at least 5 days, just if you're a close contact, at least 10 days if you test positive. That's a thing where it could knock him out for a game this year. So that was a huge storyline earlier in training camp when 3 of their 4 quarterbacks, including Mond, who is unvaccinated, Nate Stanley, their number 4 guy, they ended up bringing in another like 4th, 5th string quarterback. But yeah, 3 of their 4 at the time were out. So they had a practice where literally Jake Browning was the only guy who could throw. He threw like 100 passes throughout the practice. He was the only quarterback. It was surreal. So he actually did pretty well. But it's a worry. I mean, there's no way around it with Kirk Cousins or, Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. Whenever you have an unvaccinated quarterback, just the way the protocols are, you're risking them missing a game. So it's entirely possible that it won't pop up at all this year, but who knows?
Now, you mentioned Jake Browning getting a couple reps with the first team. What are his chances of making the 53? Does he have a shot of being the number 2 this season behind Kirk Cousins, usurping supposedly Kellen Mond? Yeah,
so for most of training camp, Browning was the number 2 guy pretty clearly. I mean, there was, especially after that early practice, like I said, where he was the only guy and did well, and then played well in practices after that. But as of late, Mond has been gaining a lot of steam in that battle. He was the better of the 2 in the preseason opener. Browning threw a pretty ugly pick 6 to Patrick Surtain of the Broncos. So I think Mond is catching up. In my 53-man projection, I have them both making the roster, just because Browning, I think, has showed enough in training camp this year that you don't necessarily want to risk putting him on waivers and having some team scoop him up. I don't know if that would happen, but I think the Vikings usually keep 2, but I think they'll keep both Browning and Mond, with Browning maybe being the guy who would step in early in the season if Kirk were to miss time, but with Mond as the long-term guy that they would like to be the backup.
The Vikings offense doesn't revolve around Kirk Cousins, though. It revolves around Dalvin Cook, their running back, and he played 14 games last season, only missed 1 due to injury, finished as the running back 3. He had explosive games against Green Bay. Is he coming into this season fully healthy? How high can we expect Dalvin Cook? Obviously, he's being drafted in fantasy as the number 2, like consensus, but is that still within the range of outcomes? Are there any eyebrow raises during training camp?
Not really, no. I mean, he's been healthy. He hasn't missed any time. He looks good. I mean, they're being careful with his reps in practice, and obviously in practice, you don't it's not really live tackling. So every play, it looks like he bursts through and scores a touchdown because the defenders let up. But yeah, he's he's been really, really good, really explosive. Catch the ball out of the backfield, the wide zone runs, he'll burst to the outside, he'll cut back to the middle. Like what we've seen from Dalvin Cook over the last 2 seasons, when he's stayed healthy for 14 games in each of those, is going to get you a lot of production. Just the way that this offense is built, like you said, it's built around him running the football. It's built around having a really good run blocking offensive line, and getting the run going, and then using the play action off of that. So there's always going to be the injury risk, but I don't like to label players as like injury prone just because they've been hurt in the past. I mean, he's a physical runner. He plays a position where you take a lot of contact, so you never know what's going to happen. But I think they're going to be smart about not overusing him like they did at time. Like he had some games with 30, 35 touches last year, which just with a 17-game season, I think they may want to dial that back a little bit. They've got Alexander Madison. They've got Kenny Nwangwu, the rookie from Iowa State that they drafted. They've got some options to spell Cook, but he's going to be the guy. He's a bell cow. He's a workhorse. So yeah, as long as he stays healthy, there's no reason why he's not going to put up huge numbers.
Yeah, Madison's been able to fill in admirably in the couple games where he's had a spot start. You mentioned Nwangwu. He was also a kind of surprise pick, at least from some of the prospect grades that I was looking at. The Vikings came out pretty quickly and said that he was a special teams guy. Is there any other roles that he's been filling during the training camps?
Yeah, he's been their third running back. And I think a big way that he will contribute, like you said, is I think he's probably their best option at kick returner, just with his explosiveness, his speed. He did that a ton at Iowa State. But right now he's dealing with an injury. He handled the opening kickoff return in the preseason game, and then suffered a hyperextended left knee, unfortunately, on that return, so he couldn't play at all the rest of the way. But yeah, I think he could be a guy who they use as like a change of pace guy for a handful of snaps. I don't think he'll have a big role on the offense this year, especially now that he's dealing with a little injury. But they really wanted a guy who they prioritize athleticism at the running back position. They always have, at least under this regime. So a guy who can hit the hole hard and make people miss in the open field and just be a top end athlete like they had with Mike Boone, their previous third running back, who's now in Denver. So yeah, it was a bit of a surprising pick early in the 4th round, but they have an idea for how they want to use him in a few different ways.
Well, with the loss of Boone and Amir Abdullah, being bumped down, they definitely did need an additional special team player. They've also experienced some losses in wide receiver. Olabisi Johnson went down with an ACL this offseason, but the big wide receiver on this team, rookie from last year, Justin Jefferson, there were questions of what kind of role he was going to step into last year. Obviously, Adam Thielen was the number 1 going into last year, but there was Chad Beebe, you had KJ Osborne, you had a lot of these like players, and you weren't sure who was going to be the wide receiver to step up behind Adam Thielen. And Justin Jefferson did that in a magnificent way, setting a lot of rookie records. Will he be able to repeat that success from 2020? And, with that AC joint, how much is that going to impact the beginning of his season?
Yeah, it's a good question. The injury that he suffered a couple weeks ago looked pretty bad at the time. And just the way he went down and was kind of clutching the collarbone area, almost the shoulder. People were fearing the worst, but it turned out well. It's just an AC joint sprain. He was actually able to return to practice this week. Hasn't really done much. I would be surprised if he plays at all in the preseason, but I think if they bring him along slowly, you've still got like 3 weeks until week 1. I think he'll be pretty ready to go. There might be a question of a little bit of pain management with the shoulder for at least to start the season. But yeah, just from a talent perspective, there's no reason why he can't, at least come close to replicating what he did last year. I mean, people will talk about there might be some regression in the yardage department, things like that. He's going to get more defensive attention, and all those things are true. But at the same time, he last year he came in the weird COVID season, shortened training camp, no OTAs or anything in the spring, no preseason, didn't start for the first 2 games because Zimmer and the Vikings are always kind of hesitant to start rookies, which sometimes makes sense. And then last year they look kind of dumb for that one with Jefferson, but comes in week 3, makes his first start, 175 yards against the Titans, and then just kind of takes the league by storm from there. So he could have 17 starts this year in theory if he stays healthy, compared to 14 last year. He's been working a lot in the offseason on different things to add to his game. I really think he's a special talent and a potential top 5 wide receiver in the NFL. So you're going to worry about the increased defensive attention a little bit, and there might be some down weeks where Adam Thielen is taking advantage, but Jefferson could have some positive regression in touchdowns too. He only had 7 last year, while Thielen was hogging them all with 14. So, and Kyle Rudolph's gone now too. So, I think it'll be a big year for Jefferson.
Yeah, you mentioned Adam Thielen. He's been a staple of the Minnesota Vikings offenses, as my poor Packers have experienced over the last few years. He scored, as you mentioned, 14 touchdowns. Was it just part of the scheme to get him more involved? Was it partly that Kyle Rudolph was out for part of last year, that he was now going to be the end zone or red zone target? Was it just that he found a way to get open? And is this something that he's going to replicate?
I don't know if it was really like a concerted effort or anything. I mean, Kirk Cousins, sometimes to a fault, is a QB where he's going to go where his reads take him, and he's going to scan the field and find the guy who's open, and he's going to do what his process tells him he should do. And there were times last year where that meant he wasn't throwing the ball to Justin Jefferson as much as he should have. I mean, you look at Jefferson's targets and receptions compared to other elite receivers, and they weren't quite there. And part of that is being in a heavy run first offense. But there was times where Cousins would throw to like Tajay Sharp or Chad Beebe or BC Johnson, because that's where his read told him to go. And he said he didn't think that he would come into each week. He didn't think Adam Thielen was going to catch another touchdown, but then the game would happen and he'd have 2 more touchdowns, because that's just how it would play out. And they have such a rapport from the last 3 seasons. Those 2 guys, they're good friends off the field. And Thielen just catches everything. So that makes him a really good red zone target. I don't think he'll score 14 touchdowns this year, but it wouldn't. I mean, I would expect him to be in double digits again, just the way that Cousins seems to look there. The lack of Rudolph this year, and the potential for some more big plays as well.
So last year, the Vikings didn't have like a third receiver to really like step up behind Thielen and Jefferson. They drafted Amari Smith, Marset. KJ Osborne is still there. They brought in D.D. Westbrook, who tore his ACL last year. Myron Mitchell is there. There might be a couple other guys who are in the practice squad. Which of these receivers is pushing the hardest to be that third receiver, especially with BC Johnson out for the year?
So there's a pretty clear-cut answer, and it's one of the biggest breakout stars of training camp for the Vikings. It's KJ Osborne, who was the 5th-round pick out of Miami last year. Didn't really do much, didn't do anything as a receiver. He couldn't crack the depth chart at receiver. They used him as a returner, and that didn't go very well. So it was a kind of a disappointing rookie season. I mean, he was only a 5th-round pick, but with the amount of opportunities he got, couldn't really do much with him. But came into this year, a more normal offseason, worked out with Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs, Jarvis Landry, those kind of guys in the offseason. He said Jarvis Landry was someone who really took him under his wing. And he has just had a phenomenal training camp. I mean, he was making plays every single day, getting open deep down the field, making plays as a kind of a possession receiver on the sidelines, things like that. And he has pretty firmly seized that number 3 job. Now, over the past 2 weeks when Jefferson's been out, he's been the number 2 along with Thielen. So if either Jefferson or Thielen were to miss time, right now, KJ Osborne would be the guy who would step into a big role. And even as the number 3, even on an offense that uses 2 tight ends quite a lot, and fullback CJ Ham as well. I mean, they had 3 receivers on the field, the least of anybody last season, and I believe the past couple seasons. But even still, KJ Osborne's going to get some work early this season. Now, the guy who could push him for that is D.D. Westbrook, who was their free agent pickup from the Jaguars. If he gets healthy and he actually returned to full participation in practice for the first time at the end of this week, just his kind of veteran experience. He's played with the Vikings receivers coach Keenan McCardell when they were together in Jacksonville, so those 2 are familiar. I think D.D. Westbrook could work his way into the field as well. So they've got some decent depth there, even after losing B.C. Johnson to the ACL.
Awesome. Yeah, I also heard a little blurb about Amir Smith-Marset. Any other camp hype about him?
Yeah, he's been having a good camp. I mean, he's interesting because he is just full of confidence. Kind of one of those guys who just loves to talk out there, and that's kind of the mindset that you need as a 5th round pick trying to earn your way out. It reminds me a little bit of Stephon Diggs when he first joined the Vikings as a 5th round pick from the Big Ten. So I mean, I don't want to make that comparison because obviously Diggs has become one of the best in the league, but you can see some of the flashes of potential with Smith-Marset. This year, I don't know if he'll have much of a role just with Osborne and with D.D. Westbrook, but it's possible that he could earn his way into the field by playing well, and he's a big play threat. He could also be a factor in the kick returning competition as well. So somebody to kind of keep an eye on. I don't expect big offensive numbers from him this year, but down the line, absolutely a guy who could work his way into their plans.
Awesome. We'll shift into tight end here, and we've mentioned a couple times so far in the pod the loss of Kyle Rudolph. He was always a perennial top 10 tight end, Notre Dame alum, and in his stead, Irv Smith was drafted a couple years ago. He just seems to have a knack for the end zone. But there's also been the emergence of Tyler Conklin. So what has been the feel around Vikings camp? There was a lot of talk in the spring and early summer about how I think there was a quote by Zimmer that Irv Smith's role would not evolve too much more. How is there flame to that smoke? How much is Tyler Conklin going to be involved along with Irv Smith?
Yeah, I know exactly the quote you're talking about. That's been a big talking point. And there's definitely truth to it, just in the fact that the Vikings were using 2 tight ends a lot last year anyways. So Irv Smith was the number 2 behind Rudolph, but he played a good amount. I mean, I think he had 4 touchdowns or something, and had decent yardage. So for a backup tight end, like he was out there. They're going to use 2 tight ends this year. So it's kind of just Smith sliding up to that top spot, and then Tyler Conklin filling in the number 2 spot. And we saw last December when Rudolph was out, those 2 had kind of similar numbers. Now I think Smith will be more productive this season for sure, just because there's going to be plenty of times when they only have 1 tight end out there. And another thing I would mention is there might be times when they use Smith kind of in the out, not as an inline tight end, but out wide as a third receiver almost, just with the athleticism that he has. He's not a big like burly blocking tight end like some guys. He's really athletic and quick. So I think he can have a big season. I would caution people against letting the hype get out of control with him, just because Tyler Conklin is going to have a role. Those 2 wide receivers and Dalvin Cook are going to really kind of be the top 3 and dominate touches, I think. But there's room for Irv Smith, who just turned 23, to absolutely have a breakout season this year.
Well, I've been a big Tyler Conklin fan for the last however long. I've been touting. He actually had more targets over the last 4 weeks than either Adam Thielen or Irv Smith. So I'm excited to see just how.
I will say that Conklin has been hurt this week with like a hamstring, but not something that's believed to be super serious.
Oh, thanks for just puncturing my.
No, I think he'll be fine, and he'll have a good season.
Awesome. So we'll finish here with just a couple of other things. Take about 5 more minutes, and then Patrick Peterson was signed for the defense. The defense really struggled last year, and that seemed to be a real change of pace from what the Vikings had experienced over the last few years. They seemed to be just a perennially strong defense, and then last year, just things kept breaking the wrong way. Obviously, they signed Patrick Peterson. What other additions did the Vikings make to help bolster their defense, and what adjustments do you see in training camp or preparation for this year?
Yeah, so last year was a really weird year for the Vikings on defense. 2015 to 2019, just perennially a top defense. look at like 2015, 2017, just maybe the best defense in the league. You got Mike Zimmer's creative schemes and packages and his third down and red zone prowess, and then all the talent they had at all three levels. And it just fell apart last year for various reasons. They lost Linval Joseph in free agency. They signed Michael Pierce to come in and be that nose tackle, which is a super important position in Zimmer's defense. And then he opted out, being at high risk for COVID with a history of asthma problems. So right away, you lose that big guy in the middle. And then Danielle Hunter, the best pass rusher, quickest guy or youngest guy to 50 sacks in NFL history. He misses the whole season with a shoulder, or it was more of a back or neck injury for Hunter. So that kind of devastated the defensive line and then just made things hard for the back end. I mean, Eric Kendricks is a stud middle linebacker, but there was only so much he could do. Anthony Barr missed the whole season. They lost a bunch of cornerbacks in free agency, so they were relying on a couple of rookies there. And then Harrison Smith was kind of by himself at safety a little bit. Anthony Harris had a down year. So, yeah, it just all kind of broke weirdly with injuries, and they were playing a lot of rookies and backup caliber players, and somehow Zimmer still managed to make them like a middle of the road defense with that personnel, and they were still good on third down. They were still good in the red zone. It was kind of miraculous, but just the overall talent level wasn't there, and that you saw the Packers put up 40 on them in week 1, and the Saints put up 50, and Alvin Kamara had 6 touchdowns. It was a mess. So they went out this year, and clearly this is Mike Zimmer being in Rick Spielman's ear in free agency and telling him, like, all right, we're gonna fix this. I want my defense to have good players again. So getting Hunter, Pierce, and Barr back internally was always going to make a big difference. And they go out and they get Dalvin Tomlinson to be another defensive tackle in the middle. So they've got 2 huge guys in there. They're going to have Tomlinson kind of playing the 3 technique, and they think he can rush the passer a little bit. They think Michael Pierce can rush the passer a little bit as a nose tackle. He's pretty quick for being 340 pounds or whatever he is. They go out and get Patrick Peterson. They go out and get Bashad Breeland at cornerback, Mackenzie Alexander, the slot corner, Xavier Woods, the other safety, to replace Anthony Harris. They even got Sheldon Richardson to be like a third defensive tackle on passing down. So on paper, there's a lot of talent at all 3 levels on this defense. The question are guys like Barr, who's been kind of shaky over the last few years. How is he going to play? Patrick Peterson has been down the last few years. He has not been the same kind of perennial all-pro that he was for much of his career in Arizona. So can they get him to bounce back with a little bit of a different scheme? They're going to use him a little bit differently, not have him like shadowing elite receivers and following them across the field, things like that, which they think will help him. So the pieces are there. The question marks are the secondary, those corners. Peterson and Breeland, I believe, were the 2 most penalized cornerbacks in the NFL last year, so that's going to be an issue. And then the other defensive end spot opposite Hunter, they've got a few guys mixing in there, Stephen Weatherly, DJ Wanham. There's been some talk about them potentially signing Everson Griffin, who was a staple of the defense prior to last year. They worked him out this week. No signing's been announced yet, but that still could be a possibility. So if everything breaks right with Zimmer leading the way and all the veteran talent, like this could be a really good defense. And I think that's what gives a lot of people optimism about the team overall, because the offense was good last year. The offensive line, which we haven't talked about, is always going to be a question mark. But yeah, people are high on this defense. I think it has kind of a wide range of outcome. But I mean, with Zimmer, the baseline for this defense with this much talent is like being middle of the pack. Like that's the worst it could possibly be. And I think it's more likely that it'll be a top 10 type of unit with the potential in fantasy to create some explosive plays with interceptions and sacks and things like that.
All right. We'll leave you with one last question. What is one sleeper player or one standout player from training camp that people should keep their eyes on?
Well, I would say KJ Osborne. We already discussed him. But I'll try to think of somebody else. Are we talking either side of the ball?
Either side.
Okay. One guy I would keep an eye on is DJ Wanham at defensive end. Now, if they do end up signing Everson Griffin, his role is going to be diminished a little bit. But if they don't, I think he'll end up winning that job as the other defensive end across from Danielle Hunter. He's been playing really well in training camp. And they've been using him in different ways. He'll rush the passer, but they'll also either line him up at defensive end or sometimes at like an off-ball linebacker. They've been experimenting with some different fronts, almost like 3-4 stuff, tight fronts, and he'll drop back into coverage. And actually, they had a little scrimmage at US Bank Stadium a couple weeks ago, and he had a pick six dropping into coverage against Chad Beebe. So that kind of shows you the athleticism that he has, the ability to move in space. 4th round pick last year out of South Carolina. I think he's got a lot of upside. He's somebody who stood out to me on defense in training camp. And then offensively, I would just say KJ Osborne again. Maybe the hype's getting out of control for him, but he had a really, really good training camp. So look for him to do some things on offense this year.
Awesome. Thank you, Will, for talking with me about the Minnesota Vikings. Where can the people find you on the Twitter, and where can they find your work? Yeah,
so on Twitter, it's at Will Ragatz, WILLRAGATZ, and then cover the Vikings for SI.com for Sports Illustrated. So it's SI.com/NFL/Vikings. Find all my work there.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for spending this evening with me and chatting about the Vikings, and I hope that the Vikings do really well, except for when they play my Packers.
I didn't know you were a Packers fan when I was coming on this, but yeah, it's always fun to talk football. Thanks for having me on.
Definitely. For the listeners and viewers out there, you can follow us at Fantasy Data NFL. Me, FF Stalder, on the Twitter. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts. And look forward to chatting with y'all again. Have a great one. We'll see you.